So on the part two of this interview, I knew we were running out of time last time, and here we continue. We went through, family and how that's so important and building up your community, doing the basics, doing great work. Now, challenge is the next thing I wanted to talk about, right? Coronavirus obviously really hit a lot of people hard.
Mhm.
So what happened to the doctors around you and your network, and how did it impact you?
Yeah. Both good and bad, I think, with COVID and what's happened. I think it's really for a lot of people, maybe they were in this go, go, go mode and they put their health on the back burner before COVID. And now that they're at home and there's been this kind of resurgence of immunity and wellness and talking about all of the risks being higher with cardiovascular diseases. So I think people are really uh, overall thinking more about their health even more than they had been in the past, and thinking more about uh, specifically holistic medicine or alternative medicine maybe a little bit more as well. And so I saw it go both ways. I have friends who pay a lot of money for that. They have a high overhead in their clinic spaces in Hollywood and LA, downtown, different areas around LA. And they struggled because they weren't seeing patients in clinic for a long time. Still doing virtual visits, almost everybody that I know that's in my network here. But I ended up being kind of lucky in that I had a space that I was using up until about February, and I was in the process of finding a new space when COVID was happening. So I have a space that is with an MD, but I don't have overhead of rent. I just use it when I need to. So
Wow.
yeah, and I see some of their patients when they're traveling, but they haven't been traveling. So I was in a good position where I could do a lot of virtual medicine, and then also I specialize in IV training, so I'm advanced trained in IVs. So I was able to do some of those in-home IVs, which increased in demand over COVID because people wanted an immune boost. And so, yeah, I got busier, but I had less overhead, and I worked from home for the most part, doing a lot of virtual medicine and following up with patients that I've already seen virtually, running hormone tests, there's a lot of companies that have innovated for in-home testing, especially during COVID, but they were existent before COVID. And so I just relied more on those methods. I think before COVID, I was about 50-50, half in office and half virtual. And I went mostly virtual, maybe 5 to 10% in-person IV therapy only when it was required. So yeah, it really varied based on, I think it was really based on how much overhead and if you were renting a space, because you were really losing out on that in clinical practice.
What would your advice be to a doctor listening out there? Because, it sounds like you were like, okay, rent can be expensive, et cetera, right? It's like, and doctors, I'm sure they know about that, right? And they have to figure that out.
Yeah.
But what would your advice be to a doctor who, let's say, lost 50% of their clientele? Because I've seen stuff like that happen,
Yep.
in one of our groups here that I'm a part of. What would your tips be to them? Have
Yeah.
you ever lost patients that way?
Yeah, I have not. I've seen a greater influx of patients, but for someone who did lose patients, I would say that innovation is
Mm-hmm.
it's the best time to innovate. So
Mm-hmm.
finding ways that you can really expand your reach as a healthcare practitioner, um, going more digital, going more virtual, offering consults that might cater more to the schedule and the lifestyle of certain of your patient population, especially in a time of COVID. It's difficult for practitioners who do manual therapy, so for chiropractors and for PT, because most of their work is one-on-one in person, but there's
Yeah.
still ways to innovate and do virtual things. Like I do a workout almost every morning, 4 days a week. That's all virtual. And I would have done that in a gym, but now I do it virtually. You could do PT, you could do that virtually, potentially. Chiropractors, I think, have shifted more into doing more education because they are trained in functional medicine and labs and nutrition. So shifting more in that gear instead of the Cairo adjustment. So I think it really, what it really did is it pivoted business. So for the businesses who were maybe not forward thinking or innovating in a digital sense, it forced them to move that direction. So
Okay.
yeah.
What do you see most doctors, I guess what most doctors have done wrong during this time is they really haven't bounced back fast enough and to innovate, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you're a physical therapist and you're like, okay, I'm going to try to outweight COVID. The best advice I got from somebody was imagine if just COVID was to last forever. That's how you got to think about it, right?
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
So now you've got to start planning the new plan. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's probably the mindset you need to have.
Yeah, have more than one income source, because if your main income source of seeing patients in a clinic goes away, then you don't have anything else that's generating revenue, then you're in panic mode. But if you have other things that are bringing in revenue outside of that, maybe an online course, you have an ebook, Audible books, Amazon, whatever, having a product line, something that people can access that's not directly related to your time and services. I think that can be such a peace of mind, really.
100%. I definitely agree. And then when it comes back to services also, right? Think about your services you can do virtually versus in person. And you got to start being creative as well, because it's not necessarily the service you do, but the problem you solve and why people see you, So that's awesome, Dr. Amber. Great advice there. So what would you tell people, at the end of every episode, I have one takeaway. So if somebody's listening to this episode, right, and you give them one piece of advice, to start, what should they be looking to do? What's some tactical stuff?
Well, if they're not already clear on who they want to speak to, shifting and pivoting in COVID, who's your ideal market? Connect with them and connect with them virtually, ideally, so that they can find your services virtually. And then pivoting and going online, I think, is just so critical. You see a lot more doctors who are developing an online presence where this doctor-patient relationship is shifting, and that I've seen that happen for me, where they see my life on a social media platform, but it builds trust and rapport. And so, yeah, that might be more of a potentially millennial trend, but I think that that's where so many people are looking for practitioners is online. They're looking for information and knowledge and life transformative holistic medical advice or just tidbits of what can they do about COVID, what can they do to boost their energy, their immunity. There's so many things that even I don't know as a practitioner. So to constantly presenting new information and connecting them with how to get access to that, and that typically is through a practitioner or my website or a book or something that I refer them to. So yeah, go digital, connect with your target market. For me, that's women who are looking to work on their hormones and really optimize their body composition, their energy, their sleep during this time when they have time to focus on it. That's who I've been connecting with. And I think getting clearer about your message, speaking the very specific words, it's like a dog whistle. When the woman that needs me hears it, she's like, I need to work with her. So yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaways.
That's awesome. And I think that's very true, right? Once if you can identify, hey, I'm a part of these groups, or these are the groups that I'm targeting, and you can start joining them. Yeah. And as Dr. Amber was saying a couple of minutes ago in her, the way she's attracted people is through friends, through the community, et cetera, right? If you can be a part of that community, then that's probably one of the best types of clients you can get. Or if you want to join that type of community, because then you're interacting with them, their pain points, et cetera. And then it's much easier to craft your message. And with every interaction, you can just better clearer and clearer message. And then you're going to start converting more patients. And then, it comes back down to treating them like family and taking care of them. And then they'll spread the word of mouth. So thank you so much for your words of wisdom, Dr. Amber. You made it through the interview. It took us part 1 and part 2. And now's your time to plug it up. Tell us about your social media handles, your website, your
Yeah.
book, your movie. What should we be checking out there? Plug it up.
Okay. All right. So they can find me at www.dramberd.com. That's my website. They can book an appointment from there. I have a lot of info about peptides. I have a free peptide PDF. It's called the ProPeptide Diet. So it talks about, aside from working with a practitioner and getting injectable forms of peptides, which I use in my practice, how they can really incorporate that into their diet and their lifestyle, repair, recovery, longevity, how to promote collagen synthesis in the skin. So that's an awesome resource. And then they can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. I have a lot of videos on peptides and how I use them and how testimonials of patients on there. So, and that's going to be Dr. spelled out DOCTOR, Amber, AMBERND. If you plug that into Google, you'll find me on all of those platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Yeah.
Awesome. So Dr. Amber ND, guys, check it out. And thank you so much. That was another episode of Vital Doc Talk.